At the beginning of May, this channel put out a leak consisting of a wide range of Intel bombshells. A positive one was that Raptor Lake Refresh 14th Gen was a larger uplift than your typical refresh, and even seemed like a bigger update than Zen 1 to Zen Plus. And another positive development was that Meteor Lake seemed like it would be boosting past 5 GHz this fall, putting to rest any notions that it was another Ice Lake situation of a CPU that really didn't bring much new to the table besides slightly lower power usage. But indeed, if Meteor Lake wasn't an Ice Lake situation, some of the bad news in that leak was that it did seem like, at best, a Tiger Lake situation, where it fell short of some of the projections and really wasn't quite good enough to be worth launching to desktop. Unlike Granite Rapids, that used an updated version of the big core architecture in Meteor Lake that seemed perfectly on track. But yeah, so anyways, that was some of the good, some of the bad. Really, the biggest bombshell in that video was a reaffirmation to what I had been saying for months, that Lion Cove, the big core architecture in Arrow Lake launching in 2024, would bring around a 40% performance uplift over Meteor Lake at same core counts in TDPs. Although if you'll notice in that leak, I didn't mention thread counts. Did I? And actually, less than a month later, in my Intel 15th Gen leak, the video where I exclusively leaked Cougar Cove, which is not a new trashy reality TV show, it's actually the new P-Core architecture plan for Panther Lake. Anyways, in that video, I excitingly leaked that the 8 big plus 32 little core model of Arrow Lake that I was told was canceled a year ago had now been reactivated. It would be coming out later than expected because it was put on hold for a while, but it was still coming. That's really exciting. Although if you'll notice again, in that video, I did not mention thread counts of these products. I technically only mentioned core counts, which brings me to the first thing I need to conclude in this video. That, yep, I'm putting this quote on screen. The one source was okay with me quoting them, and multiple confirmed this, that when they approved and looked over my leak slide before putting that video out, in the back of their minds, they had been hearing that hyperthreading could get canceled in Arrow Lake, but they apparently were doubting it. But at some point in late Q2, this decision has been made, just like the decision was made by Intel to axe AVX512 in Golden Cove and axe DLVR in Raptor Lake, which will now be actually reactivated in Raptor Lake Refresh, but that's for another video. You see, they neglected to mention this because they didn't think it would happen. And, well, all right, here's the good news, though. The good news is those performance simulations or projections that I told you about in those leaks, apparently those were based on simulations of a stepping that had already had hyperthreading disabled, meaning I am not changing my projections for Arrow Lake performance in those videos. It was based on a stepping that had already disabled hyperthreading. And in fact, newer steppings are going to come out later this year that are hopefully the final versions of Arrow Lake that will have hyperthreading completely removed and also have even more performance enhancements put into the architecture, meaning that any notion that Arrow Lake is going to be a small performance increase over Raptor Lake and Meteor Lake is complete nonsense. The only thing I might amend in my leaks about Arrow Lake from a couple months ago is that in white text, which does not denote a ton of confidence, projection I made myself for multi-threading performance, I'd probably adjust that down to the lower end of the spectrum, closer to like 40 or 50% or something. Not wildly off, but because the hyperthreading is not there, I can't be sure it's going to be at the upper end of that projection that I made myself based on what I knew of 6+8 to 6+8. But considering I have been told that they project Arrow Lake is at least 40% better on average than Meteor Lake 6+8 versus 6+8, I would still say it's fair to assume that it could be at the lower end of that projection, but I wouldn't assume any more than that. Although speaking of assuming things, look, there's been a lot of assumptions made around a recent Arrow Lake leak put out by Igor's labs that had a set of internal benchmarks that a lot of people were saying suggested Arrow Lake would be possibly only 6% or 1% faster than Raptor Lake. Which, before I even get into what's going on with that, let's be clear about something. Intel is going from Raptor Lake to Arrow Lake from 10 nanometer to 4 to 3 to 20A/TSMC 3 nanometer. Guys, you don't do 2 to 3 node jumps and get a 1% performance increase. Those types of claims don't pass the sniff test, and frankly, that's not what Igor's labs claimed if you actually read the original German. What Igor showed is a test that he had, and to take it as it is. Here's an early test. It shows at least that Arrow Lake will be at least this fast, and really it seemed to mostly focus on the fact that this set of tests had Raptor Lake refresh projections that were pretty much in line with what I had leaked. That's what Igor seemed to focus on. But I actually have much more to say about that, as, you know, I reached out to a bunch of sources, and one of them was actually able to, at Intel, find documentation that lined up with what Igor had, and I am told that that was not final projections of Arrow Lake performance. If you look at this quote on screen here, this was testing on physical A0 samples in Q2 of this year, and the test demonstrated that Arrow Lake, with these old engineering samples, was already getting 3 to 20% higher performance at 250 watts versus Raptor Lake 8+16. This was not final projections. This should be thought of as a progress report. And guys, this progress report of A0 silicon already demonstrated that the i7, not i9, the i7 tier of Arrow Lake was already comprehensively beating the i9 13900K, despite not having hyperthreading and running at lower clock speeds. Let me say that again, just so it lands as hard as possible. The people that I talked to at Intel say that what Igor leaked lines up with documents they have of physical testing of A0 i7 samples. Old i7 Arrow Lake samples beat Raptor Lake by up to 20%. The i7 tier beats the old i9 tier by up to 20%. It doesn't even have hyperthreading. What do you think is going to happen when the 8+32 i9 tier launches with B silicon, at least? It's going to be wildly stronger, and this is why context matters. I mean, really, have we already forgotten the silly conclusions people made about Zen 4 before we knew all of the information? When information came out that Zen 4's IPC would probably be between 8 to 15%, so many people declared it was a bulldozer situation because it used more energy than Zen 3, and that was before people understood that Zen 4 has all-core boost clocks that are like 30% faster than Zen 3. That's why it uses more energy. And we have like a 13% IPC increase with like 20 to 30% higher boost clocks. That's a massive performance increase, a bigger performance increase overall than what we saw from Zen 2 to Zen 3. Context matters. Don't jump to ridiculous conclusions that somehow Intel is going to go between 2 to 3 nodes and only raise performance 1%. That is not the case with Arrow Lake. It's going to be a big performance increase. You just don't know all of the details yet. And speaking of details, well, I do feel a bit silly for missing that detail that Arrow Lake could be removing hyperthreading in my last big Intel leak. It was could, and technically I guess they could still add it back according to a couple of sources, although no one thinks they will. And, well, I'm going to make up for this to you guys today by telling you far, far more details about what's going on with Meteor Lake, Arrow Lake, Lunar Lake, Panther Lake, Nova Lake, Beast Lake, Rogue River Forest, and Diamond Rapids, including core counts and performance projections. This is a big one, people. But first, an ad from Micro Center, who is opening up a new store in Charlotte, North Carolina, the second new store in 8 years, bringing the total to 26 nationwide. By signing up and visiting the new Charlotte store, you can receive a 128GB flash drive for free. You do need to go there to the new Charlotte store to get it, but if you are in the area and happen by it, you'll get it even if you're not a new Micro Center customer. And if you are a new Micro Center customer, check out all those links in the description. One of them gives you $25 off all new CPUs, including that exclusive 5600 X3D 6-core with V-Cache that just launched, and it stacks on top of other deals, like 16 gigabytes of RAM free, and then another $25 off if you submit pictures of your bill. Or if you want to go Intel, you can get an i7 13700K for around $400 with 32 gigabytes of RAM free. And again, get $25 off that, $25 off for submitting a picture, and so much more. There's so many deals they have. Please click the links in the description. Even just clicking on those links helps Moore's Law is Dead so much. And really, it's a good time to build. And I can't think of a better place to do it for cheap than Micro Center. Check out Micro Center at those links today. All right, everybody, that's it. Let's get to a summary of about half a dozen architectures that Intel has coming to you guys over the next few years. But as always, I will be starting an Intel leak with some caveats. And the first one is that I highly recommend anybody watching this at least glance through my Intel 14th Gen and Intel 15th Gen videos to first understand what this video is adding on to. This video isn't going to recap everything that has been discussed this year from this channel about these architectures. The video will be an hour long, and for most of the people watching would probably sound really repetitive. So this provides updates on architectures mentioned in those videos, things that have changed, and new bombshells that I've learned. And there's something about Intel evolving past hyperthreading that is actually massive. But with that notion, most of the products discussed here really are 2+ years away. Some of them are 4 or 5 years away, and thus they are very subject to change. For example, there were things that I know Intel contacts of mine were working on, like Norton Lake, Ocean Cove, and even 24-core Meteor Lake desktop as well. Those were all canceled, though. That doesn't mean any leaker that talked about them were wrong. We even have seen leaks of schematics of a 24-core Meteor Lake platform. Those were real schematics, but they were canceled. Things change, especially when they're over 2 years away. And they especially are subject to change when you're working at a company as chaotic as Intel, where you're insisting on these complex amalgamations of multiple tiles, with each tile possibly being designed by a different team in different countries and then coming together and hoping it all works. Well, people are going in and out of Intel like a revolving door of new and old employees. It's a chaotic company right now, and there are a lot of decisions being made that are changing future products coming out. Like, for example, a GPU tile might be delayed on one of these products, or really all of them, if AXG is behind and underperforming. But then if the little core overperforms, maybe it's a little bit higher than projected initially. So things will change, and I am 100% sure I'm going to need to update you guys before the end of the year on minor changes to most of these architectures. But as far as I'm concerned, this is what's going on now, and let's get to the updates. So first of all, just a couple of Meteor Lake updates. I first want to drill in that Meteor Lake really seems to be launching in October. Now, I think there's a decent chance that Intel will claim a launch in September with some limited paper launch so they can say they were ready for back to school. But really, October is when you should expect to be able to buy a small amount of Meteor Lake laptops. It's really late in Q4 when it's going to be widely available, according to the people I've talked to recently. Additionally, and unfortunately, it's starting to sound like Adamantine, a technology exclusively leaked by this channel, might be canceled for Meteor Lake. Now, if it isn't canceled, though, you should expect it to be in a limited amount of special products that come out after the initial wave. So don't expect every Meteor Lake product to have Adamantine. In fact, don't really expect any of them to. If they do, it's going to be a special thing, and it's really probably more meant for Arrow Lake, which on that note, Arrow Lake, let's get to some updates. So the 8+16 core count and lower tile. So not just 8+16, but like an 8+8 tile and the 8 and the 6+8 tiles. These are all planned to launch by the end of 2024. And then that reactivated 8+32 core tile is set to launch in the middle of 2025. Yeah, that's a bit after that, and trust me, I'm sure Intel's going to be trying to get that out early Q2 if they can. So it's not that far after the initial launch, but right now that stalling of progress on it really has delayed it a bit. But it is coming, and I believe that will be the i9 tile, whereas 8+16 will be the i7 and lower tile. And as exclusively leaked by this channel as well, I got to remind you all that Jim Keller's Royal Core project set out to design a new family of architectures that will succeed really the family of architectures Intel's been using for over a decade now. Things like four-way hyperthreading, dropping legacy instructions, and other radical ideas were proposed years ago and then have been simulated for years, and Arrow Lake is the first generation launching that was influenced by Jim Keller. You can think of Arrow Lake as analogous to Zen 1 in importance for Intel. And that is why back in May, a decision was apparently made to axe hyperthreading. Arrow Lake is the first step into the new family of architectures. And these new family of architectures, although they looked at 2- and 4-way hyperthreading, are planning to move past them. And so if you think about it, if Intel knows they're going to be moving to something, and this is probably the biggest leak in this video, to something called rentable units, which I'll talk about later, and you can't quite get hyperthreading working well in Arrow Lake without some performance hits, why would you double down on it? Why delay Arrow Lake to get hyperthreading working when you're kind of going to be done with hyperthreading in a few years? Anyways, that is what I believe is going on here. They wanted to have hyperthreading in Arrow Lake. It was always supposed to be there. They even considered 4-way hyperthreading. But after Arrow Lake, they're moving away from it. And so then why double down on making it work? Let's just get Arrow Lake out on time. It should still be very powerful. Those projections I put out still look like at least 40% higher performance than Raptor Lake. Intel believes that's good enough, and they're done trying to launch the perfect moonshot. If they're going to take the performance crowns, they want to launch as soon as possible. And yeah, so any benchmark you've seen so far is on physical A0 silicon. B's silicon is coming later this year with even more enhancements that should give us a much better idea of what final Arrow Lake performance is going to look like. But we really won't see that until probably the second half, or should I say the very end of this year. And at this point, actually, I will add this as well. I'm not willing to double down on the iGPU specs. Multiple sources are saying that AXG is in chaos, and they're really not sure of what tile will be ready. It was supposed to, as first leaked by Adored TV, with proof on roadmaps, use 320 Celestial execution units. I've in the past week heard all different types of architectures and execution units proposed. I really just don't think Intel knows what AXG will have ready when Arrow Lake comes out, and so I'm kind of done talking about it for at least a few months here. All right, now let's move on to Lunar Lake, which is supposed to launch in the first half of 2025, right after Arrow Lake, as an ultra mobile architecture. So basically, think of Lunar Lake, which I am told uses the Lion Cove Plus architecture for the P cores and Skymont for the E cores. Think of this as maybe something like Ice Lake, or honestly even something like Lakefield. I'm not even sure that Lunar Lake will have rentable units or hyperthreading in it. Neither are mentioned. So I really see this as potentially some sort of like 5-watt below the weakest Arrow Lake product that launches in 2025 to ultra thin products. And then after that, I am told that there could be an Arrow Lake refresh, but there's no documentation confirming this is what their plan is. But as I leaked in a recent Broken Silicon, Raptor Lake refresh was conceived of late last year. And so if Intel wants to do an Arrow Lake refresh, they have plenty of time to decide to do that. But it's not confirmed right now. Just a lot of people think it might happen because, well, Panther Lake, yeah, I know I'm going through a lot of stuff here, but in my Intel 15th gen leak, I was told that Panther Lake was almost canceled. I am now told it's not canceled, but the desktop version is. Hence, why an Arrow Lake refresh might happen. And so I guess they still plan to, as of today, launch Panther Lake to laptop in 2026 with Cougar Cove cores, but they're axing the desktop variants. And an Arrow Lake refresh may be utilized, or there might not be a refresh, depending on when Arrow Lake actually ends up coming out. And I am still hearing, though, that Cougar Cove is a huge performance uplift over Lion Cove, and that it is utilizing rentable units. So to me, it seems like Panther Lake, in addition to Diamond Rapids, will be the first architectures to move past hyperthreading entirely and bring rentable units. Which, on that note, Diamond Rapids is how I first got confirmation on rentable units. I have people working on Panther Lake that confirm they will use it with Cougar Cove, but also Diamond Rapids is going to use it as well on 192 cores that are apparently Lion Cove Plus. I know that sounds confusing because I recently said that Lunar Lake uses some version of Lion Cove Plus. It's in documentation, but I don't think they're sure if rentable units will be ready by 2025. but they do think they will have it ready by 2026 for their server variant of Line Code Plus, if that makes sense to you all. And I am told that the way Diamond Rapids is organized is with 4 50-core CPU tiles with 2 cores on each of those tiles disabled, 2 memory controller / IO dies, and then 4 base accelerator dies. So Diamond Rapids supposedly has 10 tiles. There will be 4 accelerator tiles at the bottom, and then stacked above that is 4 50-core CPU tiles and 2 memory core / IO tiles. So this thing seems complex, and it's supposed to bring a roughly doubling of performance over Granite Rapids and performance per watt. And by the way, Granite Rapids, and I did ask about this before I recorded this video, is projecting a similar performance uplift over Sapphire Rapids. I'm told the performance per watt uplift for Granite Rapids won't be massive. It's going to go to like 500 watts apparently, but it should roughly double Sapphire Rapids performance. And then Diamond Rapids should double performance again, bringing the total performance per watt probably to 3 to 4.5x by 2026. Now, this is, I am told, the first Intel server architecture since Skylake that's supposed to finally achieve what Pat's been talking about online, unquestioned leadership and server performance according to Intel's competitive goals. Now, Intel will have to prove this, right? I'm not promising you that's what will happen. That's why it's in white text. But the engineers working on Diamond Rapids are incredibly confident. This isn't marketing people I'm talking to here who say Sapphire Rapids already wins. Intel engineers know that Sapphire Rapids is a joke by the time it came out. They do not think that will be the case with Diamond Rapids. Although, I must caveat, remember, we're talking 2026 here. That's going to launch after AMD Zen 6. But still, Intel is expecting Venice to have at least 192 full big cores and like 256 C cores possibly. That's Intel's projections, not what I'm hearing from AMD. So I guess just to put things in perspective, when Intel contacts of mine think Diamond Rapids is going to take all performance crowns and have just unquestioned leadership, they think this is competing with like 192 Zen 6 cores that are supposed to be 30% better than Zen 5 cores. If they're underestimating AMD, maybe they won't win. But that's what their point of comparison is. And either way, I would say this points to some continued massive performance increases year over year out of Intel if they can launch things on time. Also, Rogue River Forest is the successor to Clearwater Forest. I'm exclusively leaking that today. And of course, Clearwater is the successor to Sierra Forest. And moving on to 17th gen now with Nova Lake launching in the second half of 2026. At this point, this seems like the full implementation of Royal Core. So, in other words, if we're comparing Arrow Lake to Zen 1, you should compare Nova Lake to a Zen 2 moment for Intel. And it's supposed to launch to desktop first and then mobile near the end of the year. And it seems like it might actually still use the same socket as Arrow Lake, meaning if you get Arrow Lake, although you'll have to buy a new platform next year, you might be able to upgrade to Nova Lake, which will be another massive performance increase, and that's exciting. And then there's Beast Lake, which I'm just going to go through this quickly because it's so far out, guys. We're talking about something that could be 4 or 5 years away. I've been notified that Beast Lake is in early development with an extreme focus on single-threading performance. This is the full completion of the Royal Core vision. And in fact, some sources actually think this is either a successor to Nova Lake or a variant of Nova Lake. Like, Nova Lake is the main generation, and then Beast Lake's going to be like some talk on this that's for gamers, and goes with 4, and this is what they call them, extra big cores plus 32 little cores. Last big Intel leak, I talked about how I wasn't sure which design they'd go with. It's becoming more and more clear 4 extra big plus 32 little cores is the current lead design in the plan of record. And again, must be stressed that anything that's 4 years away is subject to change. But this type of stuff is really exciting. All right, and so there are all of those details I just threw at you, and I apologize for how many there were, but I always try to avoid having a 1-hour video. I use specifics. Please feel free to look through those slides closely before getting to this part of the video where I give you my overall opinion. But really, getting into my opinion of what do I think about Intel's future after learning so much more about their upcoming products, I really think that I should break my opinion into 4 different categories. My opinion of Intel's future in client desktop, client laptop, server, and then just the overall healthiness of the company. Let's start with desktop first. Yeah, it still seems that, to me, Intel, to the dismay of AMD fanboys, like I've been saying for a year now, I really think that Arrow Lake's going to be a winner if it comes out on time. I mean, think about it. We are looking at a 30 to 40% or more performance increase over Raptor Lake. That should almost entirely make it beat Zen 5. And then Nova Lake sounds like it really could be a Sandy Bridge moment. However, I do have to say, that last minute failure to get hyperthreading working in Arrow Lake, I do think that will allow Zen 5 to keep some multi-threading crowns until the 8 plus 32 model launches. And I really doubt that the 8 plus 32 or 8 plus 16, the top models there, are going to beat Zen 5 X3D on average by a large margin in gaming, if by any margin at all. And actually, the reason I doubt that is pretty specific. So, rentable units, we're going to have to wait and see what that means. I assume Intel, or really Jim Keller, wouldn't have outlined moving past hyperthreading unless he came up with something crazy that's way better. But Arrow Lake doesn't have rentable units, and it seems like the 8 big cores will be limited to just 8 threads. And developers, and I asked a couple of developers about this before I put this leak out, developers have been planning for games to utilize at least 12 threads, and ideally over 16 threads, for years now. And there is currently a massive latency penalty in games when you try to use both P and E cores at the same time on a single gaming application. So, with that in mind, even if those P cores are crazy powerful, and I think they will be, I think what we're going to see at the end of next year when it comes to gaming benchmarks with Arrow Lake is there will be games that are put into 3 different buckets. The first bucket is older games, don't really need more than 8 threads. They're going to run at light speed on Arrow Lake, and that'll be exciting for people that play those games. Then the second bucket will be new games, which, remember, Arrow Lake's coming out over a year from now. So these games will be built with like 16 threads in the consoles at a minimum as a baseline in mind. I think the single core performance is still going to be so powerful that half of the newer games slightly win against Zen 5. But then I do think about a third of the newer games are going to have a latency penalty unless we find out there's some big thing Intel's done to mitigate this with Arrow Lake, which we might find out. But I think Zen 5 X3D with 8 cores, 16 threads, and Vcache is probably going to still keep a lot of big gaming wins there. And I think overall, Arrow Lake is going to be a weird CPU to evaluate for gaming, where some games it wins by like 30% or more against Zen 5, but then in some games it might lose by 20% against Zen 5 X3D. And that's just something to watch for. And also, I think that otherwise, Intel's just going to trade blows back and forth with AMD in client desktop. And then when it comes to laptop, well, I didn't talk about laptop that much in this video, but overall, I think that Intel's going to continue to, every now and then, have hyper-efficient laptop generations like that we saw out of Meteor Lake, but that it's going to be unlikely that they're able to have a win across the board for a few years in laptop. I think next year, with AMD launching Strix Point, Strix Halo, and all of these, Hawk Point, like just a litany of different APUs with powerful graphics included, that AMD is really going to make it hard on Intel and laptop next year, and they're going to try to take as much market share as possible. And Intel's really not going to be fighting it back hard in laptop, I don't think, until 2025 or later. And that's going to be rough on them, especially when you consider that with AXG just completely floundering, I don't know. It sounds like at a minimum, AMD's always going to have better graphics, and that Intel will be a generation behind in that regard for the foreseeable future until Nova Lake. Which, now let's just talk about server. When we talk about Intel server, look, Granite Rapids roughly doubling Sapphire Rapids performance in a year sounds really impressive. But that doesn't sound better than what Zen 5 Turin's going to bring. And so I think while Diamond Rapids could take the performance crown a year and a half from now, or really actually about 3 years from now, I don't know. Is it really that impressive if it's 3 years from now? I just leaked that Meta is an example of a company that is fed up with Intel and thinking of dropping their business. And when I hear about how impressive Sapphire Rapids is going to be from Intel engineers, I just can't help but go, is it too little too late? I mean, Diamond Rapids sounds good, but if Intel is below 50% server market share by 2026, is it going to really make a big enough difference to save them? I mean, Sapphire Rapids sounded impressive when I was talking about it in leaks in 2019, but that didn't exactly pan out, did it? And that really brings my overall opinion of Intel's healthiness in the future full circle. Arrow Lake, Lunar Lake, Panther Lake, Nova Lake, Beast Lake, Rogue River Forest, Granite Rapids, and Diamond Rapids all sound great. But if all of them end up coming out late, inefficient, and more expensive to produce than what AMD already launched months or years prior as competition, none of that matters. Intel, no matter how good something looks on paper, you cannot keep launching products that slightly beat AMD at some stuff and lose at other stuff after they've already launched it and expect anybody to care. Meta is thinking of just dropping your business, not because you don't have exciting things in a PowerPoint, but because you show them a PowerPoint, you tell them to wait, and then you tell them it's coming out a year later than expected. Nobody wants to put up with that. Inconsistencies are what cause companies to lose money, more so than losing performance by 5% here and there. And so, Intel, your roadmaps look great, but you've got to make sure you execute on them before your lack of execution executes you. All right, and that is gonna do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy this video, please double check that you're subscribed to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel and ring the bell button so you don't miss upcoming leaks and other updates from this channel. And then support our sponsors if you want any other products. And, if you have extra money, even just $2 a month, consider subscribing to the Moore's Law is Dead Patreon. There you'll get access to a Discord where you can talk to me and other fans about this video after it came out, ask questions, ask guest questions. A former retail source of mine is willing to come on as a guest now and talk about what's happened to graphics card pricing over the past few years. You can ask him questions if you join the Patreon now and reply. Also, at higher tiers, you get Broken Silicon early and ad-free. You get to ask me and Dan questions for free on Broken Silicon news episodes. You get free questions for loose ends. And additionally, actually, that $2 tier gets hour-long or longer videos every month that are called Die Shrink. A recent one talked to an NVIDIA engineer about what hardware DLSS actually needs to function properly. All of this content is out there for you if you just have some spare change every week. But no matter what, though, if you made it this far, thank you for watching.